there's this myth, this mystique that there are Porsche drivers and they know something that the rest of the world does not know.
It is difficult to drive. It is easy to drive. It understeers everywhere. It oversteers everywhere. It does both of those things at the wrong time or the right time. It is going to put you into the fence. It is going to make you a champion. There are people who understand it in a way that others don't, and you never will.
Who would want to drive this thing? And I explained it to Pat, and his eyes lit up, and he goes, I'll be there at Road America on Tuesday. I want to drive this thing. And after 4 laps, he was like, yeah, no, I think I'm going home.
Okay, welcome. We are It's Not the Car. We come from space and the planet Racetron 5000. Take us to your leader, but only if he's not a jerk, right? It's just jerks. Racing, so many jerks in racing. I'm Sam Smith. I am a journalist and a club racer, and if you can't tell, I am getting over a pretty nasty chest infection, so I have this sexy baritone that really just works for radio. Or maybe it doesn't work for radio. I don't know. Guys, does it work for radio?
I don't know anything about radio. Is this radio? Do they have radios anymore?
I mean, we can pretend, right?
Do they stream? Sirius? Is Sirius XM a radio? I don't know. Well, anyway, I'm Jeff Brown. I'm not on the radio, never have been on the radio. I do race engineer cars every once in a while when they let me do that. And my primary job is bus driver to and from the races in the motorhome.
And I'm Ross Bentley. I am not. I did not race at, what was that planet you said? Spacetron?
Racetron 5000?
Racetron.
6,000? I don't remember. Racetron.
Whatever.
Planet Racetron, sure.
Planet Racetron. I raced this past weekend, so every now and then I get to drive a race car. Used to drive them a lot, but now mostly I coach people. But this past weekend I had some really, really super nice people allow me to go and drive the race car. It was fun.
We were talking about this before we started taping. I have never been in a race car, shared a race car with Ross, but I have now been in Jeff's bus. And let me tell you, it's a nice bus. He talks about it like a bus, but it's not a bus. It's a really nice bus. So to kick this off, we announced this on various social media places, but we taped this show in batches, and this is the first time we've taped since it's happened, so forgive us, this is old news, but for us, it's new news. We have a central website for the show now, and that site has a merch store on it. You can visit it at itsnotthecar.com. Now, I built this site, and I designed all the merch on it, and that may or may not have been a fabulous idea. But if you're interested, hey, check it out. There's some funky stuff there, and it's reasonably priced, and you can help the show keep going. All proceeds from everything there go to keeping the show alive. Ross is raising his finger. Ross, yes.
Well, I was just thinking, Sam, it's way, way better that you designed all that stuff than Jeff for me doing that, because that would have been a complete disaster. Jeff would have had a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, and I would have had, I don't know, Spacetron or Racetron or something.
I mean, you say that, but you guys gave me carte blanche. You trusted me. And then I just went away and popped out with this thing. And as I said this earlier, so I'm repeating myself, but it still makes me laugh. Like, I literally could have gone away and come back with like 5 t-shirts, each of which had just 1,000 dildos on them and the words, "It's not the car." And you would have been like, cool, we made a mistake. But instead, we have shirts that are fit for adults and do not in any way feature sexual instruments, let's call it.
Yeah.
So
they're cool. They're cool. And the reason that I, at least, gave you carte blanche is because I didn't want to do that. It sounded like a lot of hard work.
Yeah, right. The truth comes out, right?
Sam, I think you'll be way better at this. Yeah, you should do it. You don't want me doing it. Yeah. It seems like a lot of work.
Oh. And pretty much anything that involves work, Jeff and I leave up to you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, exactly. That makes sense. That totally tracks.
And then if it's really, really hard, we let Mike do it.
Yeah, that's fair. Right. Yeah. He's probably listening to this right now going, not anymore, suckers. And then he deletes the whole thing. So if you're hearing this, hey, we win. Mike loses. We love Mike. Mike, please don't kill the show. Moving on. Okay, so speaking of sexual instruments, today's show format is a new one. We call it How to Drive It. But that's just a catchy name, and that's not the whole story, because half of the show is about how to drive a given thing. Every time we do this format, we'll kick into Racetron 5000 LXI, or, BMW blah, 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 or the Chevrolet Hootie Hoot, whatever the hell it is, we will focus on that one vehicle, that machine. for the whole episode. Half the episode will be driving, the other half will be engineering, because go figure, we have some people here who know things about that. And also we have me. So to kick this off, I've said that about 40 times. Ross, you want to tell the people what our subject is?
911.
The Porsche 911.
911.
Like I said, sexual instruments.
Sexy.
Not because it's sexy, but because from above it looks like one. The hips, there's a tapering. It's a family show. We'll stop right there. So to start all this, we have to ask the question and answer the question, hey, what is a Porsche 911? What does it want? So, basics. We're not going to go into a history of the thing. If you want a history of the Porsche 911, frankly, you probably know more than all three of us put together, even though all three of us know a great deal, because the thing about the Porsche 911 is that everyone knows something about it, or at least thinks they do. And there are 1,000 books. And if you want to find out what Bootsy ate for lunch in 1968 and what color what shade of yellow cad the yellow cad on that trailing arm bolt was from 1971 until 1971 and a half, you can know it. That's not what this is about. This is more general. So we will start with a general definition. So the 911, it is a rear engine car, not mid-engine, rear. That means engine behind the rear axle. It is a sports car in some ways. It is also, in other ways, it fits the traditional definition of a GT car, Grand Touring, long-legged, right? Sports cars are more focused on feedback. Porsche engineers typically place a high priority on doing things their way, and the 911 is a pretty good example of that. Porsche engineers in the Porsche company typically place a high priority on tradition and on feedback to the driver and on motorsport. And all of those things the car kind of exemplifies, right? It has been built in one form or another since 1964. More than 1 million of these suckers have been produced. And again, it is one of the 2 or 3 cars that everyone, even your grandmother, the guy at the store down the street, those are not the same people, by the way, my dog, everyone knows what a Porsche 911 is. If you don't know something about it, you know the shape and the notion and kind of the personality. Maybe you know that, I don't know, there are stereotypes. Sometimes people think they are driven by bad people. Sometimes people think Porsches are driven by good people. But that's part of why we're doing this episode and part of why we kick this off, right? Because the stereotype, that cliche, there's so much misinformation attached to that car. And some of that misinformation comes from the people who have owned and driven and raced it. And some of it comes from people who have simply read 1,000 articles on the internet and then come back and been like, wow, it wasn't yellow cad. It was more of an orange cad. And it wasn't until 1971 and a half. It was like until April. So right now, we're going to list off those stereotypes. It is difficult to drive. It is easy to drive. It understeers everywhere. It oversteers everywhere. It does both of those things at the wrong time or the right time. It is going to put you into the fence. It is going to make you a champion. It will never make you a champion. There are people who understand it in a way that others don't, and you never will, right? Did I miss something, guys? Like, that's basically the cartoon image of the car, right?
I'm going to say that the part that bothers me the most is there's this myth, this mystique that there are Porsche drivers and they know something
Right.
that the rest of the world does not know. And I don't know. I want to talk about that. I want to spend a little time digging into that because I'm not convinced.
So we're going to get to that. And that's what I love about this, right? Because in reality, the things that make a Porsche 911 unique are sometimes they require like a tiny little bit of special attention. But in the end, anybody who pays attention to how tires work, how cars work, what the car wants, all of that stuff, they see that thing, that package of little special needs that 911 has, right? And a lot of what we talk about here will also be impacted by how the cars changed over time, what it's lost, what it's gained, both mechanically and philosophically. Because like any model this long in the running, it both is and is not what it began life as. You could say that about any other name this old, right? Other things that were born in the middle of the last century that are still produced on wheels are similar. So you could say that about the Mustang, Ford Mustang. You could say that about the Chevrolet Corvette. You could say that about, I don't know, Ross and Jeff, right? You guys were born somewhere in the last century, 1980 something, right? I'm sorry, it was 1970
we're older than a 911, are we not, Jeff?
Yeah.
Right. Did they have the 911 shortly after the Korean War?
Sure. Yeah. Well,
okay.
No,
then
not
I
really,
was
but
born
sure.
in that era.
Okay.
Right.
So, like Ross and Jeff, this car has been, it's also helpful. Sorry, let me back up. It's also helpful to talk about the basic changes in how it works and how it's built. So, like Ross and Jeff, this car has been rear-wheel drive. It has been all-wheel drive. It has been naturally aspirated. It has been turbocharged. It has been air-cooled. It has been water-cooled. It has been hybridized. It has been light. It has been heavy. It has had much tire. It has had little tire. It has had, this is the comical part. This is what I love. It has had in production trim less horsepower than the current Toyota Corolla, and it has had 700 horsepower off the factory line with a warranty. And that's not even counting the race cars. That's just road cars, right? Many of those race cars had engines that produced far more power and were just physically enormous, just massive piles of plumbing that looked, like nothing so much as a chemical plant gone feral, right? All of which is to say, through this whole period, through the last half century of production of this car, Porsche has worked and struggled and sometimes fought against itself internally in the way that you can have existential crises about things you make and do. And I don't know, maybe that's just a writer thing that I feel deeply, deeply in touch with that. But they've struggled to both evolve the car, work with, and in some cases against its strengths and weaknesses, keep it feeling the same, and yet also keep it up to date from a performance standpoint, from a noise, vibration, and harshness standpoint, from a comfort standpoint. Keep it within a certain window for price, blah, 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 blah. All the while, there is that engine out back, right? All that mass out behind the rear axle. That has been the one constant. And that big hunk of composite and alloy and I don't know, call it what you want, soul, intangible, German, whatever, distilled lederhosen, whatever you want to label that. That mass impacts how the car works in a corner. What happens as load transfers around in response to driver inputs. And for road cars, that's in some cases meant that people think the cars automatically find ditches. For race cars, that means that, Porsche has had to work sometimes harder than others to make that layout less of a competition handicap, right? And sometimes that meant managing the rulebook through a little manipulation, and sometimes lobbying sanctioning bodies, and sometimes nothing. And all of this is ultimately remarkable because we have a car that started in the middle of the 1960s at just under 2,400 pounds and is now, the lightest model is now, that's the 911 ST. It's just over 3,000 pounds. Any of them, you climb into them, and they all feel similar. Not the same, not identical, but they feel similar. And that, in fact, that 3,000-pound model I mentioned, this car they currently build called the 911 ST, that is a stripped down, sort of bare bones attempt to respond to public complaints that the car has lost something over time, right? So, without further ado, I will wrap all this up and we'll get into talk about it. But it's important to talk about why the three of us are kind of equipped to discuss this, right? So, me, painfully, I don't want to talk about, God, I just hate saying that I've done things. The more we do this, I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to rip through this very quickly. So I'm one of these people who believes that the car remains appealing in spite of all of the weaknesses, in spite of all they've done to it, in spite of all the management. I've tested them for 20 years in car magazines, many, many, many of the road models, not quite all of them, but multiple examples from every generation, including rare factory prototypes and 100-point concours cars, even race cars like 934 and 935. I once drove a very, very early 1964 model that is widely agreed to be the first production 911. It was built for Ferry Porsche, and at the time I owned it, time I drove it, it was owned by Jerry Seinfeld. So that's my reason for being here. Jeff, what's your connection to the car? What's your, in a nutshell, your time with it?
Short time with Porsches. To me, it was never, it's kind of like my same thing with Ferrari 333, which you talked about. It didn't really, it had no special appeal other than it was the race car that the team I was working for gave me. and I had to make it go fast. I didn't really care that it was a Porsche or a Ferrari or a whatever. I have a Corvette now. It doesn't really care. They're all not fast enough by definition. Unless you win every race, they're not fast enough. They all have problems. They're all not special. They just handed me a Porsche and said, here, we're racing this year. And I was like, all right. So we just attacked it like any other problem. And I know that it makes a lot of people, even what I'm doing now with the Corvette, they're like, well, it's a special car. And I'm like, I have to remember that when I'm talking to Corvette people or when I was talking to Porsche people or Ferrari people, oh, yeah, it's a really, it's super special and it's really cool and it's like amazing and all of that. So it really, I think you probably might hear it's kind of the same thing from Ross driving it, but it's running a Porsche, engineering a Porsche, same problems any other car had. And same issues. You might have had to deal with them and fix them or optimize them in a little different way due to the physics involved with where the engine was. But other than that, no. So I ran one with Ross actually in a little operation that was called Team 16, where we had 3 16-year-old drivers and Ross driving. And then at Daytona, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. And then the last one I ran was 2017. At Core, we ran a GTD Porsche, while the other part of Core, it was 2 parts, was running the factory Porsche GTLM cars. So I had a lot to do with peripherally with the GTLM factory Porsches, 911s, and we can talk about that. But I directly engineered one of the GT3 GTD Porsches. So those 2 were my main contact with the car.
Cool. Ross?
So I think I fit somewhere in between you guys. Like, there's a side of me that, Jeff, I agree. It's just a tool. It's what we do when we're doing our job, right? It's in my case, it's how do I make this? How do I drive this thing? What do I need to do to get this thing around the track as fast as possible? So I think there's a part of me that's like that, but I get the feel. Like, I get that thing that Porsches are special in some way. I've never got caught up in the mystique and brand, I think, of the Porsche thing.
There's so much brand. It brands so hard, sometimes too much. And you're just like, can we brand a little less, please?
Yeah, and yet I massively respect the history and what they've accomplished in racing. So you're driving a Porsche and you kind of go, okay, there's some magic that's come through here through winning Le Mans and all these different races throughout the world. Like, I get that part. And Sam, you talked about the feel. One of the things to me is I could be almost anywhere and I'll hear something. I'll go, there's a Porsche. Like, you kind of know. And how many different versions of that engine has been around since 1964. And yet there's something about the sound of a Porsche that you can recognize. It's different than everybody else. And so I love that. And I to this day, I can remember the very first Porsche I ever drove on a track. It was a production car, a street car. And it was a 69 911. And I remember driving that thing and going, this thing is just like a little toy, like in a good way. It felt so light and nimble, and I could just toss it around. I could make the car dance. And then I've driven race cars through the years, and with the Team 16 thing at Daytona, that was so much fun. Last year at Spa, I drove the latest GT2 RS, which is just a monster of a car. It is, wow. What it can do is mind-boggling, and to the point of you're going, they let just anybody drive this thing? This is a weapon. So obviously now it's got all sorts of electronics helping the thing do what it does. And I guess one of the things that amazes me is, and Jeff, I really want you to talk about this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but they took something that inherently isn't the best design in the world, and what they've done with it is, like I said, mind-boggling. It is so good. And how they do that and everything is just, it's way cool. And and by the way, I've raced against Porsches. And I remember when I was driving for BMWs, we not affectionately referred to them as lawnmowers in a attempt to make some fun of their engines. But
the nicknames are so great, and we don't need to get, none of this will be Porsche bashing, even though that probably would please a lot of people. One of the things I love about so many of the nicknames is that they are unrepeatable on air. But like the only one that comes to mind that's family friendly is just Super Beetle, and just derisively, right? Because the entire company grew out of a connection to Volkswagen, and in many ways, so much of what makes a Beetle, the original air-cooled Beetle is in, yeah. You couldn't squint and kind of poo-poo it and look at an early 911 and see that, right? But there's so much. It's like the branding. It's one of those arms that the thing just never goes away. It's endless.
So a good friend of mine, Rick Mayer, who's been the race engineer at Risi forever and ever and ever, running Ferraris. When I was running the Porsche, he'd always say, "Hey, Jeff, how's that Volkswagen running?" He just referred to it as a Volkswagen. I was like, yeah, pretty good.
Okay, so on that note, so again, just to kind of give you a setup for what we're going to do here, 2 chunks of the show. We're going to talk about driving the thing, which should be led by Ross, and we're talking about engineering the thing. And that's going to be led by me. No, it's going to be led by Jeff, because I'm about as much an engineer as I am a toy poodle in a tinfoil hat. So, Ross, let's start with the simple question. So, what we were talking earlier, and you said that in so many ways, a 911 wants nothing that any other car doesn't want. So set that aside for a minute. What does the car want that's counterintuitive? What wouldn't you expect?
So first off, I think we've got to keep in mind that a 911 is how many different versions of the 911 have there been? And by the way,
11 billion.
I have Porsche friends who I also like to make fun of, and they're going, well, it's a 997.2.61243 GTRS 12.1. And I'm like, what the heck? It's just a 911. And of course, I'm making fun of them, but it's difficult to say, oh, well, how do you drive a Porsche 911? Which one?
Okay, well, let's simplify it, right? So the simplest possible version makes decent amount of power, but not a lot. We're going to paint with a broad brush here, not give specifics. Rear-wheel drive only. It does not have any driver aids. It's a road car. I mean, you've done a lot of instructing at DEs and track days. What's the first thing? You find somebody who's just an absolute pile of elbows and asses in a 911, and they can't figure it out, and they come out of some front engine rear drive car that doesn't have a lot of power, that where the controls can basically be treated like on-off switches. What would you tell them? How do you tell them to look at it?
So, as you mentioned, a Porsche 911 still has 4 tires. When you apply the brakes, weight transfers forward, you put more load on those front tires. When you get on the throttle, more goes to the rear tires. Turn the wheel and the outside tires get more loaded, right? Okay, how much more basic does it get than that? That's the same in every single car. Where people moving from some other type of car might feel like, oh, this is a different car. One of the things that a 911 will do, typically, again, depends on setup and which model and all sorts of things, but typically you go into the corner, you kind of trail off the brakes, you turn in, and then you have to wait. And you have to wait just, I don't know, some amount of time, because if you immediately go to power, the front end kind of unloads because it wants to unload because it's got that big old engine hanging back there, and you pick up an understeer. And then, you go to power, and then you're like, I'm going to drive off the track, so I'm going to have to lift. And that's a terrible thing to do to a car. So you need to have a little patience. After you've come into the corner and come off the brakes, you have to have a little patience just to let the car finish rotating, turning into the corner, and then go to power. And then you have to do that smoothly, as you should in all cars. Smoothly is a vague relative term because, hey, one way to be smooth is to go, I'm applying the throttle now, and like 5 seconds later, you're at full throttle. That's smooth, but that's slow. So you still want to get to full power as quickly as possible, but you don't want to just tromp on the pedal. And unload the front of the car because that's just going to cause more understeer. And then if you've come into the corner and you've trailed into the corner and you've got all that load on the front end and you keep doing that, you might get a little oversteer. The rear might start to swing around. And what do most drivers do? What's human instinct when the rear of the car starts to swing around? It's get off the throttle or don't get on the throttle. And the challenge for some drivers in a 911 is that big old engine hanging out the back there becomes a pendulum and it wants to continue swinging around. And what you need to do at that point is squeeze on a little power, just enough to get some weight onto those rear tires. And then as you're coming out of the corner, the same kind of thing. If you've got on the throttle too hard and you get the rear starting to come around, that pendulum can continue to come around. So those are sort of the typical characteristics of the car. And I think what has created this myth that a 911 is dangerous and what do you call it, a ditch seeker?
Which sounds like something else entirely now that I think about it. But again, family show. So
yes, family show here. So that is, I think that's where this myth comes from that, you need to learn how to drive a Porsche. Sorry, but you know what? I have driven just as many cars that are non-Porsches that have those exact same characteristics. So it's not like that's the only car in the world that does some of that. Maybe in that combination, it happens a little bit more often, but there's nothing special there. It's all comes down to, as a driver, you're a weight manager. You've got to manage how the weight is distributed over those four tires. And if you do something silly with it, it's going to bite you, as all cars will.
So that's the core of this, right? One of the things I find really interesting with automotive evolution in general over the last 50, 60, 70, really 100 years, but with the 911 in particular, is that same characteristic is underneath the car all the way back to the beginning. But if you go back to the beginning, to 64 and 65, to the early short wheelbase cars that had 130, 140 horsepower, had 165 section tires or skinnier in some cases. And you look at how they behaved, how softly sprung they were, where they carried their mass. All of those characteristics you just described are loud and present and on the surface. They float. It's like, how when you have a pot of boiling water and you put oil on top of it, it floats across in a skim. They're right there and they're in neon. And the modern cars, they're still there, but it's underneath. It's a Princess and the Pea situation, right? It's underneath layers upon layers of mass and careful kinematic arrangement and software and stability control systems and engine management systems and traction systems, all of these things that are designed to help minimize that characteristic. And what that means is that if you get into that 64 911 and you go out on a set of, terrible period-like Michelin, X radials, you can drift it at 10 miles an hour below the speed limit on a public road, by going into a corner, popping off the throttle, turning in a little abruptly, and the back end slides out. And it does this cute little dainty whoop in the width of the car. The modern ones, the current generation, the evolution of the 991 that is the 992, what's currently in production, those still exhibit those characteristics. But the really interesting thing is they don't feel 911-y in that way until you get really far up the scale, when you start putting a lot of spring rate, a lot of roll resistance, and a lot of power into them, and to where those tiny things that are down underneath, it's like making the pea underneath the mattresses with Princess really, really large, or even just, actually a better way to describe it, I guess, is pulling out mattresses, right?
And that whole
it's the deep sigh of a man contemplating how to discuss a Porsche, the knowing how people will hear it.
The key to that is, as you said, the quick on the wheel or quick on the throttle or the brake or whatever. Those are all the exact same things. The car is going to do exactly the same thing that any other car is going to do. It just might exaggerate a few things, and that's why you got to pay attention when you're driving a 911. But again, it kind of goes back to which one of the many Porsches. And I mentioned earlier before we started here, I'd read an article by Patrick Long, who's factory Porsche driver for, I don't know, seems like forever.
Yep.
He's probably driven as many 911s as just about anybody in the world. And he wrote this article about how to drive a 911. And I'm reading it. I get to the end and I go, if it was written by John Smith about driving a Mustang or a Formula Ford or
anything,
Metropolitan Nash,
yeah,
it would have been the exact same. He didn't say anything that was different than anything else. It was like, okay, if you come into the corner, you come off the brakes, the car understeers. Well, what car is it that you should just hammer the throttle? None. That doesn't exist. So is a Porsche going to have that on average? Again, not all, but typically, is that Porsche going to have that little moment of understeer, perhaps more than some other cars? Yeah. But as a driver, you adapt to that. You adjust to that. You do what you give the car what it wants, not what it doesn't want. So again, it almost frustrates me. No, it frustrates me when people go, "Oh, you got to be a Porsche driver to drive a Porsche." No, you don't. You got to be a driver to drive a Porsche.
One of the interesting anecdotes, and again, like the cool thing about this is that the further back you go in history, the less the company was able to do to mask and kind of roll off some of the sharp edges of that character, right? So the early cars famously had trailing arms in the back that had a decent amount of toe and camber change. So that big lift, and that when you pop off the throttle or pop off the brakes, and a bunch of weight transfers forward, and there's a bunch of suspension extension in the back, and there's significant toe and camber change in the back, all of that combines with that big hunk of mass in the rear wanting to move the car and remove grip from the rear tires and slide it. So it's exacerbated. As the cars got newer, as they managed to minimize those changes under massive load and compression changes, right? That stuff smoothed out. But it's interesting to think about how all of this started, right? And there are I don't know. Do you guys remember the first iroc series, like in the 70s, the one that Roger Penske and Donahue kicked off, Mark Donahue?
Sam, I was just thinking about that because one of the things that's imprinted in my brain is how many of those photos or videos are there of those cars going around a turn and that inside front tire up in the air? Like it's just like thing is just squatted over in the rear. And I've driven 911s where you come into the corner or you're just going along and that front end just feels like, hey, I'm just kind of flopping around out here. So I love that image, and that was so cool.
I'm pretty certain you could go back to the 2024 Sebring 12-hour and see that exact same picture in turn 17.
Yeah.
I mean, they still do it. They still do it. It's not just the iroc cars from the 70s. They're still doing it today.
So the reason I brought that up, so that for those who don't know, iroc stands for International Race of Champions. And that series was devised in the 70s. And the two people had a massive impact on it. It existed for much, much longer. It was initially set up to run virtually identical, brand new Porsche 911s, basically a version of the RSR, the factory race car, right? But the iroc for decades after that, the 911s didn't last very long as the base car for the iroc. For decades after that, they used a number of different things, but it started off with I believe it was Camaros and F-bodies, right? And then kind of evolved into an oval series only. But the cool part about the first iteration of that series was that it was handed to Roger Penske and a race driver named Mark Donahue. We've talked a bit about Donahue on this show, but in a nutshell, Donahue he's kind of held up as the first great driver-engineer combination, right? He was equally good in both seats. And it was handed to them in part because Roger businessy things, and in part because Mark and Roger in particular had a pretty great relationship with, well, I take that back. It wasn't handed to them because of that. But the reason they ended up with Porsches is because Mark and Roger had a pretty great relationship with Porsche at the time. We did an episode on some of this, on the Porsche 917, the turbo cars. Go back and listen to that if you want to hear us talk about, I don't know, a guy named Pierre, whose name is fun to say. But the reason I bring all this up is that Mark basically looked at Mark and said, okay, well, we'll set up the cars, make them work. Mark did his best to make them work and work with their engineers, and the cars went down a certain path from a handling perspective, and they kicked off the series. And the way the series worked is that it was, the fields were filled. It was an invite field filled with drivers from all disciplines. So IndyCar drivers, stock car drivers, some Formula One drivers from time to time. The idea was that it would be kind of a version of what I believe it's still just called the Race of Champions, right? The event in Europe.
Yeah.
Right?
International Race of Champions or something, yeah.
It would be it was the same idea, where it would be a version of kind of the Olympics, where everybody shows up under equal terms and you get to see who's what. And well, it turns out that, Bobby is good and Davey is bad. And, Mark knows the cars really well, so they're going to accuse him of cheating or something. But the cool thing is they did this. And in the first couple of races, there were famously guys, like really, really heavy resume racing studs from around the world, who got into these things and hated them because they needed just a little bit of extra attention and they could not be driven a certain way. There were people who got into them, like people like AJ Foyt, who, by that point had, even by the middle 70s, Foyt had an Indy 500 resume and a circle track resume and a road racing resume a mile long. But Foyt got into them, figured out what they needed, and just hated it. Like, he just thought they were terrible. But that whole series was this perfect example of that last little bit that the car asks for. Even then, that if you couldn't get a handle on it, you were slow. And you could look at the grids from that period, and there are big, big names that you look at it and you're like, well, why the hell was that guy in the back? Well, maybe it was just that one car. Maybe it was just slow that weekend. And then you look at other grids and other racers, like, oh no, he never figured it out. And that's a funny thing to think of, because most modern cars have essentially evolved to need the same set of things. If the 911 then needed 2 or 5 or 7% different, it's now 1 or 2 or 3%, right?
And to be fair, Sam, AJ Foyt, and I want to defend AJ just in case he's listening. I don't want to come over with a hammer and beating on us.
He will. He's never going to die, and he's going to outlive us all.
Yeah, but here, AJ, he's used to driving whatever 600,000 horsepower Indy cars and cars at Le Mans and stock cars and all that stuff. And then I don't know, those iroc Porsches were not anywhere near that. So there was probably a little bit of, these are just little toys to him. And
yeah, probably.
And I think AJ had a bit of an ego.
No.
Maybe.
Wait.
And
no.
If he wasn't winning, that ego might have stepped in and he might have said some things. But I'll bet you anything he had a hoot doing it. I bet he just had some fun. And I think all those guys did. But take the best drivers of, the top 1 or 2 drivers from every series in the world today, put them together and let them race. None of them is going to be happy if they don't win. So I think Donahue, who, by the way, that episode we did on Donahue a while back, still one of my favorites that we ever done. I love that episode. It was so much fun. So if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. But Donahue had a bit of an advantage. He spent more time in those cars than anybody else did. So anybody that wasn't Donahue was going to go, well, somebody's cheating. Because that's also the other thing that all race drivers are taught to do through whatever, is always have an excuse and always blame everybody else of cheating.
I think the other thing that's important to think about. Oh, okay. Make a note.
Always. Yeah.
Always. Yeah. Everyone, they're always cheating. So the other thing that's important to think about with this is that and frankly, I didn't understand with the cars until I became comfortable with a certain amount of, call it whatever you want, right? Like yaw, slip, carpet moving around underneath you, whatever the hell it is, right? I didn't quite get it, but there is something about, at least from a vintage car standpoint and from a road car standpoint, and even all the way up to the modern, a GT3 RS, a GT2 RS, there is something about knowing the way that a 911 needs to operate under your feet, under your hands, didn't quite click for me until I got comfortable with that car moving and cars moving in general, right? There were a few early on when I started doing track days that way back in my teens and 20s when, I had a chance to try somebody's, Carrera 2 or Carrera 4 or whatever it was, and got into it. And it just felt kind of weird and uptight. And I was always worried that I was going to get to the edge of whatever it could do, make a stupid mistake, and then the giant myth would bite me. And that's the root of that is twofold, right? On the one hand, you have something clicked for me when I slid a 911 for the first time. I was like, oh, right, it's just a car. You do the wrong thing and the nose washes. You do the wrong thing and the taillights move on you. Okay, fine, that's what happens. But then the other side of it is the depth and length of that myth and how it can spook people, right? Have either of you ever met anybody who got into one of those things and was like, weird, and couldn't wrap their head around kind of being comfortable with it?
I would say I have some experience with that. So we when I was at Core, had run prototypes, LMPC prototypes, like open cockpit, pretty fast, high downforce prototypes. And we'd run those for 4 years or so and won championships and everything and done really well. John Bennett, the bronze driver, who was a very good, still is a very good bronze rated driver, jumped in from that prototype into the Porsche GTD car. And, the gap between him and our pro went from 2% in the prototype to 3.5%, which doesn't sound like much,
really?
But on a normal track, that can be a second on a normal, on a 100-second track. There's, you're talking 1 second slower.
Yeah.
And he struggled not because it was just different. He figured it out as he got to drive it more. He figured it out, got better and better and better. But it was so different than what he was used to that it took a lot more aggression, a lot more sliding, a lot more hands and elbows. And it was a struggle for him at first.
And Jeff, I'm pretty sure that if John had gotten into a BMW GT car or a Mustang or Corvette GT car, I'm pretty sure he would have said the exact same thing. Now, it would have been a little different because, again, every car has got something different. But going from a prototype car where you get this downforce and the thing is just nailed to the track, and then you get into a GT car that moves around a lot more. I've seen top level pro drivers. Who was it just recently that went from a GT car and like one of the best GT car drivers in the world and got into a prototype car and struggled and got back in the GT car and is really good. One of the drivers, good friend, Johannes von Overbeck, who had driven all those Porsches for Flying Lizards. And man, he could wail on a car and really fast, got into prototype cars. I'm going to say Johannes struggled for about a race, about 2 weeks, and then figured it out. And he was really good in a prototype car.
Yep.
But some drivers just have a different comfort level. And to your point, Sam, when you learn to slide the 911, you felt more confident and comfortable that you could do that. And I think there are a few drivers who love the feeling of the car moving around. There are some who like the aero downforce. And there's a few who it's a car. I'll just drive it.
Yeah.
And either way works.
And a lot of it too, it's interesting to me that so much of it hangs on what we think is going to happen, not what we know is going to happen.
Yes.
So a lot of that myth, right? A lot of the modern myth for a 911, that whole what is it? oversteer is where you leave the road backward, where you bust through the fence backward. So much of that is, you ask people what they think of if they're of a certain age, and they'll think of an early turbo 911, a 930 from the late 70s, early 80s, busting off the road backwards because somebody mistimed the input of steering and, waiting for boost or not waiting for boost and then backing off of it. And the combination of lots of suspension travel and relatively soft springs and then yada, 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 trailing arms, and the mass, all of that stuff came together to bite them. And the thing that I love about it is that and the thing that makes those cars so neat is that they have always asked for a little bit more feel and attention and precision than even the average high performance road car, much less, most race cars ask for that, period, anyway, right? But a 911, a road going 911, wants that from you to be driven quickly, even the modern ones. Although, again, so many of the quote unquote bad habits have been tamed or shaved down to be more approachable. The software covers a lot of things. So much of that has been made more approachable for most people. But the fact that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you could go back and, hand one to somebody who understood weight moving around and who understood how a car works at the limit, what a tire wants, and then hand it to somebody who didn't. And one person would go quick and the other person would be either backward in a ditch or not get it, right?
So Sam, this hopefully will be the last thing I'll say about the driving part. And you made a really good point here. The one thing about a 911 is you come into the corner, and wherever in that corner the back end starts to step out, because of it's like a pendulum out there, and it wants to keep coming around, you have to do something about that. And if you don't, it's going to continue to come around. And then it reaches a point where you're not going to stop it. And it is going to sail off the track backwards, and something rarely good comes out of that. So I think that's the biggest thing, is having the confidence that when the back end steps out, you don't immediately just lift off the throttle some more. The whole, trailing throttle oversteer thing, where you trail your foot or lift your foot off the throttle because fear takes over and you want to curl up in the fetal position and before you die again. So you lift your feet off the throttle, and that's a thing that's hard to. You have to program yourself to do that.
Because the answer is look where you're going, steer into it, more throttle, but keep driving the car. Don't stop driving the car. So many people stop driving the car at that point.
Yeah,
they just ball up.
And Jeff, I mean, I want to hear, because we got to work together with a Porsche 911 one time.
Yep.
And, I can remember talking about that coming in, and hey, the car understeers for a little bit. Can you fix that? And I can remember other times where it's like, hey, coming off the throttle here and the thing wants to come around. Can you fix that? So how do you fix that?
Right. How does that whole process different with those cars, if it is really?
Well, that's I'll get into that in a second. How you fix that is exactly the same way I fixed a couple other cars that had exactly the same problem. This is not unique to a Porsche. If you took a Ford-powered, the early Ford-powered Daytona prototypes, I ran them at Crone Racing, but there was other ones that were out there running. Shank ran them. There was quite a few early Ford Riley prototypes.
Actually, Jeff, before that, there was a Ford-powered Multimatic Daytona prototype car that you and I drove, you engineered.
Same problem.
Maybe a bigger problem.
A bigger problem. Way bigger problem.
It was a problem. But.
Right. But the thing is, those cars, drivers would come in, when we first started running that Ford DP car, they'd come in and go, oh man, this thing feels like a Porsche on the entry. And that's all I needed. I didn't need some detailed explanation or anything. I felt like as you turn into the corner, it feels just like a Porsche. Enough said. That, I don't need 1,000 words. I just need that sentence. Got it. Understand. And we'll talk about how to fix it. I ran a Nissan DPI, Daytona prototype car not long ago, 3-4 years ago. Felt exactly the same. Oh, it's got that Porsche feel. It's a Porsche feel. Okay, I made a change. How is that? Now the Porsche feel's still there. Okay, and we worked to fix it. What was the cause from those two cars? The Ford the Ford motor was big, heavy, and it had really big, heavy cam covers on it. And we worked for a year to try to fix it. Next year, they came out with some lighter cam covers and milled some metal off the cylinder heads. Problem essentially gone. We just reduced that big pendulum effect that the Porsche has. Nissan DPI, same thing. Big, massive V8 motor. Couldn't get it very low because the crank was pretty low in the motor, so you couldn't lower the motor much. Big problem, entry, oversteer, pendulum kind of thing, just like a Porsche. So the way you fix those is, it's not unique to a Porsche. It's just what you have to deal with. So you do things that you don't want a lot of rake change. You don't want the nose to dive and that big motor at the back of the car to raise up and start to swing around. You want to keep that weight, the center of gravity of the rear of the car, as low as possible. So you run really soft springs, you run really stiff front springs, you do all the things you can to keep that from that big momentum. If you can, you change the weight distribution. If you have a car that's underweight and you have to use ballast, you can change the weight distribution to offset as much as possible some of that big weight in the back. Those are the kind of things you can do setup wise. And there's one final answer, but jump in here, Ross.
So, Jeff, I drove, a few years back, got a chance to do some laps in a really cool trick, race prepped Audi. Front engine, front wheel drive car, but super trick, kind of like a TCR car. And it was kind of the same, only different. The difference here was in that Audi, that engine, it's almost in front of the front axle. So it's kind of like the opposite. You go to try to change direction and it was like a pendulum going forward.
Right. You're going straight.
And so I guess it's sort of the same thing, right? It's
it's
working within whatever you've got there. Yeah.
It's physics, right? And so, the same with the Audi. I've had cars that do that too. They just understeer all the time. So you work on this, the same thing. There was one way that we fixed it at Core, and we had the Porsches, right? We had the GTLM Porsches. I was an observer. My end of Core was running the prototypes, but all I had to do was turn around in the work bay and look at the factory GTLM cars lined up in the other right across the aisle from me, and all those mechanics and Porsche engineers and engineers from Core working on them. And I don't remember what year it was, but they got their new car, and it was before Daytona. It was probably November, December, and the new car shows up. And, all the new cars here. So I walked over there and I looked at it and I went, oh, wow, it's a mid-engine Porsche.
Right. And why was that?
And the German engineers were there helping them. And two German engineers' heads just exploded. Like, it's not the mid-engine. It is a forward engine. Like, all right, but the engine's in front of the gearbox. It's kind of like a Ferrari. There was a big thing. So we had to call it a forward engine Porsche.
That was the year and that was because of a diffuser change, right? Like that was a competitive kind of a engineering style BOP change, right? They were allowed to do that in order to get a more effective diffuser, something like that, right?
Oof, yeah, I tried to avoid knowing too much about what's happening on the other side of the shop.
That sounds like an excuse. That sounds like we really want to move the engine there.
Right.
Let's blame it on the lack of the diffuser.
I think that was why it was, and it was to help it was to make the car more competitive. But that's, Jeff, you touched on something that was interesting, right? The notion that in the end, you make do with what you have, whether that's a pile of good or a pile of bad or even just a pile of compromise. And inevitably, these are machines. None of them are perfect. Every single car on the planet is a pile of compromise in some way. But the idea that, you go back far enough, and this is, again, where the myth is rooted. And you go back far enough and you end up with those problems that you're talking about, being able to fix, that you can dial out in so many ways on modern race cars, on modern road cars. There was a point when they couldn't. So, you simply, and race engineers, factory engineers, simply made the cars work to take advantage of the disadvantage, right? Which is why when you watch, coverage every so often at the Goodwood Revival, they'll run an entire race of nothing but 2-liter 911s on tires, with a contact patch basically skinnier than my wrist. And I'm a writer. I have skinny wrists. And you watch all of those cars moving, and you watch the in-car and the drivers. It's a whole field of little kind of dancing, skating, little, beetle bug shaped things. And every driver is using, the good ones are using very small inputs to catch the car, but they're using small lifts and small adjustments. They're taking advantage of what the car doesn't do well to go quicker and using that as an adjustment. And I tested once for Road and Track. I tested, you're going to forgive me because I don't remember the exact year, but it was a 2-liter car, a short wheelbase car that had won Daytona in the late 60s. And it was the same way. And like at one point, Justin Wilson had driven it and Patrick Long had driven it. And it was dialed really, really well. But, you breathed off the throttle and the thing would go loose. It was great because every time, in my case, you make a tiny mistake and you're like, oh God, I'm not where I need to be. You just adjust it and tweak it and the car would slide a little and you'd catch it and you'd match your foot back down and you'd feel like a big hero. And this is one more reason why I'm not a pro driver, but it is fun. And I love the engineering idea that no matter what you're given, you dial it as best you can, right? That you chase the best.
Right. And like I was saying, it's not unique to the Porsche. Other cars feel the same way. One of the big advantages for the Porsche that we had when we ran the Porsche, and you see it still to this day, is when it rains, you're happy because it puts the power down. The straight line power down traction is so good because it has that rear weight distribution.
And Jeff, braking, Porsches are amazing on the brakes because when you get on the brakes, you still got all that weight back there. So it kind of keeps the car better balanced on the braking as well, right?
Yep. I was just thinking of something. When we used to qualify the GTD Porsche, we used to run on nearly full tanks. You don't have to. Most people run on light. You're running as low as possible. You put in just enough gas to do 15 minutes and get back to tech with it still running, and that's all the gas you want to run. We used to nearly fill the gas tank, put 20 gallons of gas in it because the weight distribution advantage was outweighed carrying the extra weight around.
Wait a minute. Jeff, you have told me over and over and over and over again through the years, lighter is always better.
Right. Unless you're running a Porsche.
Make me laugh. Cough again.
and Jeff, I thought when you said, there's one thing that we did to make the car better, and I was hoping you were actually going to say, just install the right driver.
The right driver.
Burn.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, God.
Oh, yep. I have one other quick thing. I did run, I said I ran 2 Porsches. I forgot about one oddball that is, I know there's a lot of oddball Porsches out there, but we ran one.
All very normal. We love all of our children equally.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face.
I built and was involved in, I was working on that. Some people have heard of the Level 5 D Sports Racer project I had. In parallel to that, Level 5 was also building a Porsche. I can't remember the SECA class. It was kind of like stockish. It wasn't GT1. It was, I can't remember even the name of the class.
Was this when Tucker was going for the runoffs or something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we built the D Sports Racer to try to win the runoffs, and he also wanted to win it in this other class. not GT1. It was the stock. I don't remember the name of the class. Basically, you had to run on a street tire, like a DOT tire, and you could run like a Ferrari Challenge car. You could run a Porsche Cup car. You could run. I don't remember all the rules. Again, they just handed me this car and said, "Here you go." And they handed us. We called the car the Hurricane, and it's because when we got the car, it had like this wavy, like a wave breaking. It looked like a hurricane on the side of it, so it got named the Hurricane. And I don't remember all the details. Porsche experts can look it up, but it was a 4-wheel drive Porsche, which was kind of weird. It had some kind of viscous thing that made the front wheels work, and it was 20% front wheel drive, 80% rear wheel drive. We built the motor, and it had just over 1,000 horsepower, 4-wheel drive on a street DOT tire. And we somehow, I remember I was at Le Mans. We needed a driver to go test this thing in the fall. And Pat Long was there, and we came out of the back of the garage at the same time, and Pat was there, and I explained this thing to Pat, being the Porsche expert he is. And I was like, there's no way he's going to want to drive this thing. It's some combobulation of some weird, like, who would want to drive this thing? And I explained it to Pat, and his eyes lit up, and he goes, I'll be there at Road America on Tuesday. I want to drive this thing. And after 4 laps, he was like, yeah, no, I think I'm going home. and because we were blowing out tires. I mean, we couldn't keep tires on it. We blew out tires going into turn 5. And we ended up with the thing that, and the engine guys, a guy by the name of Jeff Stone, kept on giving it more power and more power. And he had like water injection spraying on the intercoolers. We had water-cooled brakes, this big water tank, and it would just spray water on the brakes and on the intercooler. And so we were trying to figure out how to make it go around the corners and stop and stuff. And we came up with some shock absorbers. Again, we talked about the pitch, when that big engine, and it tends to pitch the car under braking. And that was a huge problem, because then the tail comes up and it wags around and it doesn't feel good on the entry. So the dynamic guys, Multimatic guys who build dynamic shocks, came up with these things called G valves, which were valves in the shocks.
I will make no jokes.
Yeah. Well, so they were, picture your bump damping in the front.
Make all the jokes. Maybe you guys are. This may have missed your window, but the notion that G is a hip hop reference, and like, when I was a lowercase G. I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Go on, I'll shut up. I should mute my mic, Jeff.
G as in gravitational forces. In this case,
no, it's about Snoop Dogg. Like so much of my life. Go on, please. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be on this show.
So if you picture the bump damping, you want it kind of maybe soft in the middle of the corners and for over the curbs and stuff like that. But if you don't want the car to pitch forward, you would really like to have super stiff bump damping, because then the front of the nose of the car couldn't go down when the dampers compressed. But how do you change the damping while it's going around the track? Now we can do it electronically and stuff. But back then, this is 2012, they came up with these little valves that went in the damper, basically, that had a swinging pendulum. And when you put on the brakes, the pendulum would swing forward and basically cover a bleed hole so that the oil couldn't flow in the shock absorber and make the front shock super stiff. And when the G-forces bled off and you were in the middle of the corner, that pendulum would swing back and open up the hole, and it would become a regular damped shock.
And Jeff, where did they come up with this idea of a pendulum? Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They looked at where they stuck the motor in a Porsche.
Yeah. It worked brilliant. And we put them on the Porsche, and I think Pat finally he was happy with it. I mean, that thing was a beast, 1,000 horsepower 4-wheel drive. We blew out the 4-wheel drive thingy, the viscous thing and so we just said, forget that. We'll just run. It was still a 4-wheel drive car. I can't remember if we took the actual thing out and just ran it as a 2-wheel drive. I think we ended up doing that. again, I wasn't directly involved. I was kind of working on the prototype in the next garage, but I did that damper thing to try to make the thing stop correctly, and that was a crazy Porsche. I know there's lots of crazy Porsche, but this one was insane.
That's really interesting. So it was purely just fore and aft load. I mean, did it need anything in terms of special treatments so that you didn't accidentally change the damping because you're ham-fisted or drove it the wrong way?
Nope, because you could mount this sensor, and I say sensor, but it was all mechanical and hydraulic. There was no electronics involved.
Cool.
So you could mount this valve, and if you mounted it longitudinally, when you put on the brake, the little heavy weight would roll forward and plug the bleed hole that allowed fluid to bleed out of the shock and the front to compress. So it didn't compress, or it compressed less. You could turn them the other way around. On the rear, I think we did turn them the other way around so that when you accelerated, the pendulum would swing backward and block the rear one, so the rear didn't squat so much and cause understeer.
That's really interesting. That reminds me, I thought of you because a couple of months ago, there was a short video floating around one of the social media channels, it might have been Instagram, of the footwell of I want to say 1990s, it was a BMW, so it would have been like the E36, a 3 Series, in some European touring car series, and it had come out of one of the major tuning houses, one of the factory aligned tuning houses like Schnitzer or Hartke or somebody. And it was, the car had a pendulum based, I want to say it was fore aft, or maybe it was left right, brake bias system, where there was a bias valve that actively moved when the pendulum swung fore and aft, and it was exposed and mounted in the front footwell. So under braking, it would, the pendulum swung forward and it moved the bias valve. So it gave it active bias in proportion to how much load the car was seeing, on the braking fore and aft. And maybe it's just the journalist in me, but I love engineering systems that are simple enough to, when you look at, you see how they work.
Well, I liked it because it didn't have a wire attached to it. It was all hydraulic and mechanical. And as a mechanical engineer, the minute it has a wire attached to it, I'm like, oh no. So this thing, the Multimatic dynamic engineer JF, who's like the guy at Dynamic Shocks as far as understanding these things, he brought those things out and he says, here, just let's plumb this thing in there. And I'm like, how does it work? And he took the cover off, and it's literally probably a 1-inch little hunk of metal on an end of a little 2-inch arm that just swung fore and aft as you put the brake on. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty simple. It was genius.
I love stuff like that.
And maybe that's the big takeaway here from a 911 is you give smart people enough time, they will figure out. You could take the absolute worst design in the world, and if you give them enough time and some dollars, they will find a way to make it work better. And that's what Jeff does every single day. But that to me is just clever.
So that's. Oh, go ahead.
There's the amount of engineering. Sam, you said the cars were built, whatever, is in the 60s, right? When they first started? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the amount of engineering and thought and brain power and the smartest guys in the world trying to make this thing work that have been put into a car that we all kind of know is the architecture is wrong. It's just wrong, right. But the amount of work and effort that's been put into it to refine it, and it's still competitive today. Okay, I know BOP and everything else, so, but still, the car is still a really good race car because it's been refined and people understand it, and smart people have worked on it for so long. I put that kind of effort in, and I don't know, maybe a front engine van wall still wins Formula One races. I don't know, but
nice reference, by the way. Wow. Yeah. That is not a reference I would think Jeff Brown would toss out. Applause. Way to go.
And Jeff, to take this, like last year, when I take my group of drivers to the Nürburgring and Spa, we did I spent day driving this GT2 RS and a GT3 RS, and then drove a GT3 RS off and on from Spa back to Nürburgring. It is one of the most amazing cars in the world that you can do that on the track and then have this, as Sam, you said at the very beginning, this grand touring car on the road. It's unbelievable how good that car is.
And I think, oh, sorry, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say, a friend of mine who drives for us in the Corvette in the long races, Lars Kern, who, if people are listening to this, are Porsche aficionados will know Lars. I mean, I think he holds like every record at the Nordschleife in a factory stock Porsche car. He works for Porsche and he goes out, and I think his job, it's probably more than this, but it seems like every time I talk to Lars, well, what did you do? Well, I set a record in a, like you were saying, Ross, a 911 RS3 GT4 Evo 6 Mod 2 car last week. But he goes out and he sets all these records in these Porsches. And some of them have good tires, some of them have street tires, some of them have big motors, some have little motors, some have big wings, some have no wings. And he drives these things. I mean, if there's a Porsche specialist, we talk about the guys who drive the race cars and everything, but Lars drives these things, a wide range of everything that Porsche builds every day as fast as he can drive it, and makes a living do it, and loves the brand. He gets in the Corvette, and he's happy to be in the big races and stuff like that. But man, the guy lights up when he gets a Porsche near him.
I think that's so. What's interesting to me, just as the kind of pebble of the nugget of an idea we've been orbiting with all this, is that ultimately it's not what you're doing. It's not what the car looks like or how it works or how it functions. It's the amount of work that gets put into it. And the neat thing about 911s now is the neat thing that's always been neat about 911s is that it feels like once you figure out what the car wants, and that may be a small subset of things, that may be a large subset of things, but once you figure out that language, you feel like it's a secret handshake. And on some level that the early cars were kind of independently, organically developed, and the current cars are every bit as a conscious choice where they don't have to sound like they sound, and they don't have to remind you of the way things sounded in the 1970s. They do that on purpose. And water-cooled motors take a lot of work to make sound like an air-cooled engine, yada, yada, yada. The brand is this conscious construct that's meant to somehow feel like a small family company and a giant conglomerate at the same time. And all of that is the result of a bunch of people making choices to try and keep something on track, not literally, but on track ideologically, and sell and keep the brand afloat and make it seem like the thing that people have always loved while also evolving into something new. And you see that I mentioned the Mustang and the Corvette earlier, but you see that in those two cars as well. And that's so much harder to do. And it's especially difficult to do. One of the things you learn testing road cars is that putting personality into the driveline or the chassis of something is a really difficult thing to do. And it's very easy to make make something fast. It's very easy to make something comfortable. It's possible to make something comfortable and quick at the same time, but to make it feel like it comes from somewhere and has a heritage or even just a lineage and a story behind it, that's work. That's real conscious, careful thought about the choices you make. And that's conveniently also what it takes to, engineer literally anything, whether it's a race car at a racetrack or, the pen that I'm holding. It's also what it takes to get a car on the limit. It just so happens that the Porsche kind of demands that you pay attention in varying degrees according to which one you're driving, right? A lot of cars don't.
Sam, the last thing I'll say is Porsche 911 is not special. You're just a weight manager. Your job is to use the controls the right way.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, it is very special because of that history, because of that character, that personality, that feel that you get. And for me, it's, you stomp on the throttle coming out of a corner and you hear that engine back there. It is special. So it's a 911.
So I'm going to end this with a question, because this is one of the things that I've been thinking about for years and years, and it's deeply personal for everybody. But we're talking here about, the nature of to get all big woo-woo on you, the nature of ideas, the nature of stories, the nature of heritage, right? Do you guys like it when a car is less than straightforward, when a problem is less than straightforward, when something is different, either intentionally or by accident? Does that make you, is that interesting? Or would you rather do you want simple problems? How do you look at
that? Yes and no. I don't like, here's my answer. I don't mind if it's not straightforward and it's got its own quirks and everything, as long as I can figure it out and beat all the cars that don't have those quirks. Then I'm happy with it.
That is the perfect racer's answer, and I adore
it. And for me, Sam, I drive a Lotus Elan.
Which means, of course, I think we know where you fall wrong.
Yes, has no quirks. No quirks,
yeah, none at all. No, ever. Nope.
I love a car that has character, and it's kind of like there are certain corners on tracks that don't have a lot of character. They were kind of designed on a CAD system to drive this, perfect radius for this corner, and everything's perfect about the corner, and it's like, that's boring. Give me a turn 17 at Sebring where you got to bounce the car over things, and a carousel at Road America, corkscrew turn 6 at Laguna. I mean, those corners have characters because they have flaws. Yeah. And a 911 is like that. It's got character. I love it.
I mean, at the core, I'm the same way, right? I'm broken. I like, from a handling standpoint, I like cars that ask you to work. From a problem standpoint, I don't really like literature that asks you to work. I tried to read Henry James in college, and I wanted to suck start a shotgun. But the rest of it, like in most of the rest of life, I like things that ask you to be present, and I like things that ask you to think and care and be on your toes. And if it's easy, well, that just means there's less to learn, right?
Perfect.
That's everything. Perfect. Yeah, everything you just described is, people. We're all people, right? Interesting people are complex. Humans are complex, and the more interesting a person is, the more complicated they are. And that's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. That just means that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on. You stay interested.
My rock climber guy that I follow, Alex Honnold, said if it was easy, it wouldn't be hard.
And yet, what was the thing that, Ross, I think you trotted this out several episodes ago. What was it, like a shirt you saw or something that basically just said, we do this not because it is easy.
Not because it's easy, but because we thought it was easy.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know. What did Whitman say? I contain multitudes. Who knows? But on that, I think that's our show. We are out of time. As always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you. We appreciate you. I can't talk anymore because I'm so full of mucus. Forgive me. My baritone. We appreciate you, and we're glad you're here. Tune in next week when our topic will be 30 new fun ways to use to use PJ1 traction compound on your mother-in-law and or household pets. Now it is time to read us out. I'm going to do that. It's Not the Car is produced by us. Mike Perlman is our executive producer, and we love him, and he likes burritos, which is good because that's the currency in which we pay him. I'm the show's creator. For more on bonus content, perks, and future live events, you can subscribe to our free newsfeed at patreon.com/notthecar. That option is at the 3 little dots in the upper right side of the screen on our Patreon page. And if you're really, really paying attention and got this far in the episode, you could hear me right now tell you that Patreon members get a discount on our web store. And our store is also at the same site where we have all of our other little information about the show, where you can read fun trivia about Ross and see pictures of Jeff as a child and see pictures of, me doing whatever the hell it is I do to get paid. That site is at itsnotthecar.com. If you like this episode and you'd like to support what we do here, please check out the merch or check out that same Patreon link and click Become a Member. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with anyone you think might enjoy it. Literally anyone. We're not picky, folks. I don't know. Just walk up to people on the street and smack them and say, have you heard It's Not the Car? No? Why not? If you get arrested, we're not going to bail you out. When you share the show, it makes a huge difference, and it really does help us keep It's Not the Car on the air. As always, thank you for listening.
Have fun.
Keep driving, having fun.